Before YNW Melly was facing the death penalty, there was another man that was one of the original faces of rap in the 80s who had a shot at a bright and luxurious future, but instead, he ended up on actual death row and sentenced. Another rapper that's currently facing death row is YNW Melly, who started out as a star rapper and ended up with a murder charge. When YNW Melly was 18 years old, he released his EP Collect Call in late 2017. In the summer of 2018, he released his first mixtape, I Am You, which included his hit song Murder on My Mind. That song instantly became a hit and slowly got more and more popular, reaching 4 times platinum. He even did a song with Kanye West, Mixed Personalities, that was platinum, and was on the album We All Shine, which was released while YNW Melly was incarcerated. The song peaked at number 42 on the Hot 100 in 2019. Before popularity, YNW Melly had a lot of problems with the law since he was a teenager. Also, he was a suspect in the shooting and death of the Indian River County Sheriff's deputy, Gary Chambliss, and said that he might be one of the people who fired a gun and killed the deputy. But the reason why YNW Melly is currently on death row is that allegedly he, with YNW Bortland, killed 2 of their friends, YNW Juvie and YNW Sack Chaser. Bortland was arrested in Texas while Melly turned himself into officials in Broward County. Both were charged with first-degree murder, and they said that the plot was to murder their friends for some time, and they agreed to stage it as a drive-by shooting. But like I said, even if YNW Melly is sentenced to the death penalty, he wouldn't be the first rapper. Cool C was the first. It was the early 80s when hip-hop was only at the beginning of a long way to being a commercial art form. And already Cool C and his homie Steady B were blowing up. They performed a lot at Fairmount Park in West Philadelphia. They had their album being distributed through the city and waiting for potential buyers in famous places like at Funko Mart, which was on Market Street. Cool C was acquainted with Steady B while both of them were studying at Overbrook High School, where they were both end up signing to Pop Art record label. These guys were the quintessential Philly rappers. They had that Philly aggression and cockiness that just made them completely ours. Steady B came out with the song dissing LL Cool J, I'll Take Your Radio, and Cool C made a track talking about the Juice Crew diss. Pop Art record label was located in West Philly on City Lane Avenue and was owned by Lawrence Goodman. At the time, the label was a real deal in the hip-hop world in Philly, as a lot of popular artists were releasing through it. Hip-hop was still very much a singles medium back then, and Pop Art Records was more influential than they're given credit for. The Goodmans were street dudes, but they knew hip-hop. This was back in the 80s. We had these guys representing where we was from, and that was special too. Steady B and Cool C both represented that Philly hustle mentality. Steady B was Goodman's nephew, so he was first to be signed to the label and released his album, Just Call Us Deaf. Together with the label, Steady B was on a mission to really take the flyness of Philly to the masses. Before being signed to Pop Art label, Cool C made several appearances on 3 Times Dope Records. In 1988, Cool C released the first single, C Is Cool, which was produced by Steady B and Goodman. Steady B had helped a lot through the recording process, and soon it became an unofficial soundtrack of the city. But soon after, Cool C released his first album, I Got a Habit, which was enjoyed by crowds not only from his hood, but from the whole city. Popular radio personality Lady B recalled those times and said, "That song was so awesome. Back then, Cool C was just a fun-loving kid who loved hip-hop. Back then, everyone in Philly was into representing their neighborhood. With me coming from West Philly, I'm an original hilltopper. I thought the whole crew was very creative, but when the Goodman brothers got Cool C signed to a major, Atlantic Records, that was big." Lionel Martin, who was the urban music director, was hired by Lawrence Goodman to shoot the video for Glamorous Life. Cool C was a very nice, polite young man. Cool C surely knew how to dress, and it was evident whenever he was doing photo shoots or videos. Schoolie D, who helped establish gangsta rap as a genre with his song PSK, was an acquaintance of Cool C, recollected that when it came to fashion, he was slick. We all had tailors back then who made us suits, and Cool C was into flashy fashions. Back when the 90s came, all of that changed. All good things must come to an end, and the golden age of Cool C seemed to pass when he released the album Life in the Ghetto in 1990, which wasn't even half as successful as the previous album, and Atlantic Records had to show him the door. Even though Cool C was displeased, he formed a new crew, CEB, with Steady B and DJ Ultimate Ease in 1993, and they released their first and last album, Countin' Endless Bank, on Rough House Columbia. The first single from the album, Get the Point, was about gangsters that robbed the barbershop and then were locked down. For many fans of Cool C, his new rhetoric seemed a bit out of tune and slightly forced, which could have represented the sufficient drop in sales. Less than 15,000 copies were sold. It was the early morning of January 2nd, 1996. A plenty section of PNC Bank on Rising Sun Avenue was making a few last touches before opening its doors to visitors. The bank manager had just entered the building, but he didn't know that his every move was closely monitored by Cool C and Mark Canty, who were getting ready to rob the bank. In the car nearby was the third man of the heist, Steady B, who was the wheelman and the getaway driver. And it was no coincidence that the trio chose this branch, as no security guard was assigned to it. Cool C was carrying a .38 caliber revolver, while Canty carried a semi-automatic 9mm. As soon as the first PNC employee arrived at the bank, Cool C and his partner made their way through the front door. The manager was pushed to the floor while Canty took an employee to the back to open the vault. It wasn't their first hit, so Canty was waiting to score big again. But he didn't know that as soon as Cool C and his partner entered the bank, a silent alarm was triggered and help was on the way. In patrol car number 2516, a female police officer, Laretha Baird, was riding solo and answered the call right away. As soon as Baird came close to the bank door, Canty saw her and screamed to Cool C, "Here comes the heat." It was evident that from that moment, Cool C's thoughts were about getting away from the police officer who was coming closer and closer, rather than about the past or potential future paydays. Hiding behind the door, he saw a piece of her blue clothing in her face. He was ready to remove what he saw as the obstacle from his crew's way. "Don't worry, I'll take care of her." He was fast to make his partner calm, and then he fired his .38 caliber revolver. The single bullet that came from his gun smashed through Baird's chest, piercing through her liver and heart. The blood spilled from her body, and she fell to the floor. Right after, Cool C exchanged fire with another police officer and ran away with Canty to the van, which sped away from the crime scene. The guns were left on the scene, and the whole incident was captured on security cameras. Officer Laretha Baird, before becoming a police officer, was a teacher's aide at Pickett Middle School in Germantown. She joined the police force in 1986 when she was 34 years old, and at the moment of the robbery, she was a 9-year veteran at the 25th District. Laretha Baird was a mother with 2 sons, Steven, 11 years old, and Michael, 17 years old, and also took care of her aging parents, and she was the first female police officer in Philadelphia to be killed in the line of duty. Despite Officer Baird wearing a bulletproof vest, it lacked bullet-resistant panels, which was why the bullet came right through and pierced through her body. She was taken to St. Christopher's Hospital, where she was pronounced dead at 9:56 a.m. In another bank across town, her parents heard of their daughter's death from the television. The guns that were left in a hurry by Canty and Cool C were found by the police officers outside of different entrances of the bank. The minivan that Steady B was driving was stolen and was later found abandoned not far from the bank. Police officers found a lot of clothes that were worn by Cool C and Canty. All this evidence together led to their arrest, not to mention that Steady B's girl, where they all met up back at his house, would later testify and give all of this information, even though it wasn't necessary considering how much actual evidence the police had. Guns were traced back to Canty and Steady B. The .38 caliber revolver that Officer Baird was killed from belonged to a relative of Canty and was in his possession till the moment of the robbery. The semi-automatic 9mm was traced back to a friend of Steady B who acquired the gun for him. At the same time, Cool C and Steady B were laying low, hiding in the shadows, nervously thinking about what their next move should be and whether somebody was coming after him. Steady B was arrested outside of his home 2 days after the robbery, on January 4th, 1996. Steady B decided to make a confession and tell, and gave up his partners in the crime. Despite that, Cool C turned himself in on January 6th. He stated that he was innocent and has since maintained his innocence, and his lawyer, Charles Peruto Jr., banned him from being questioned. Cool C's mother was protecting her son and claimed that at the time of the robbery, Cool C was safe and sound at home with her eating his breakfast. 2 weeks after Steady B's confession, though, Canty was arrested in Maryland. When Cool C and Steady B were arrested, the head of the label, Lawrence Goodman, told the reporters, "I was totally outdone when I heard it. We couldn't believe it. They've never been in trouble, to my knowledge." On October 30th, 1996, Cool C was found guilty of first-degree murder, 3 counts of robbery, conspiracy, aggravated assault, burglary, and possession of an instrument of crime. Steady B and Canty were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the likelihood that they didn't get the death penalty was because they decided to cooperate. On November 1st, 1996, Cool C received the death penalty for murdering Verde and was on death row awaiting execution in State Correctional Institution Green in Pennsylvania. On January 10th, 2006, Cool C's death warrant was signed by Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, and his execution date was set for March 9th, 2006. On February 1st, Cool C was granted a stay of execution by Pennsylvania Judge Gary Glazer. Then Cool C's execution was set for January 8th, 2015. But he was granted a second stay of execution by Pennsylvania Judge Louis Philippe Restrepo on the 5th of December, 2014. He's still alive today, awaiting execution, and during his time in prison converted to Islam and found a new spiritual path while he was there. One of the radio hosts we quoted earlier, Lady B, had this to say: "I never knew those guys to be gangsters. Knowing their upbringing, that wasn't the cloth they were cut from. They let that materialistic side of hip-hop get the best of them. They just didn't wake up that morning intending to kill a cop."